This will be about the status of genocide education in the United States. For this project, I actually did it through Honors H399, which is an independent study available through the Honors program. I think most of the students in here are seniors, so it might be too late for you. But professors, I actually really try to push this because I honestly think that this is one of the best things that has helped me as a student. And I mean, she mentioned the Fulbright, and the Fulbright really complements the study. And I believe that this really played into being able to receive that award. So I would strongly recommend exploring Honors H399 for your students. So what I did in order to look at the status is I decided to look at 17 qualitative key concepts, and these concepts I pulled off the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website, recommendations for teachers. Now, they didn't have 17 explicitly listed. I took some academic liberty, I guess, and filled in gaps where I thought that they existed. And I explored those. And then through those, I figured out that 13 states do not, spoiler alert, 13 states do not have genocide education standards at the state level. Like Colorado doesn't have any state standards for teachers for genocide education. So with that, I did a little bit of quantitative exploration to figure out maybe some potential factors as to why we have this presence of genocide education, or GE, as you'll see in the slides, and this absence of GE across the United States. So moving on, for the qualitative bit, I looked at the state standards for all 50 US states, and I threw in the District of Columbia for this part of it as well, just for thoroughness. And I looked at it on the secondary level, so secondary education being high school, in 3 of the subjects where it's most likely to be featured as opposed to math class. English language arts, where I figured out through an academic article that over 60% of genocide education actually takes place in ELA. US history and world history, both of those for obvious reasons. So with these, I looked at 3 subjects in 51 lands. I call them lands using that word collectively for 50 states plus the District of Columbia in lieu of a better word. I don't really like the word. So here are the 17 key concepts that I looked at. You can see, and we'll go through these in more depth a bit later, so I'm going to progress through this fairly quickly, but you can see that there's a fair bit of range. I mean, a lot of it is focused on the Holocaust, kind of on the left-hand table, and then it moves a bit towards more general stuff like the United Nations Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, that's UNCPPG or CPPG, and others as well. So I looked at these 17 and I read through all 51 sets of standards for all 3 subject areas, seeing if these were featured. So through these, I made a couple hypotheses, and some of these key concepts were sort of lumped together based on their thematic similarity into similar hypotheses. So the Holocaust and the Shoah being an alternative word, I suppose, for the Holocaust, and I hypothesized that most lands in the United States would address the Holocaust, but they wouldn't use the word Shoah, which is this Hebrew word. And Holocaust is fairly U.S.-based, its usage, I suppose. I mean, like it's like La Shoah in France and other countries. It's referred to in different ways. So through this, I figured out that 38 states mandate Holocaust education, and you might remember I said 13, 38 lands, sorry, 38 lands. And then 13, so this is 37 states. And you might remember that 13 states don't have genocide education. So actually what's interesting, and I'm kind of spoiling it ahead of time, is in every single state where there is genocide education, there is Holocaust education. No state requires that you teach about the Rwandan genocide, any other genocide, without having you teach about the Holocaust too. So this overlap is really interesting. And if you look at the historical background for why states mandate, you can see that usually the push is for Holocaust education, and then genocide education larger kind of trails behind that push for Holocaust education. Here we have a cluster, and these are of course specific elements of the Holocaust itself. So I hypothesized that these would be less emphasized. I mean, mostly it would just be the Holocaust, largely because curriculum writing is a zero-sum game, and you can only fit so much in PDFs and documents and stuff like this. So I figured maybe Holocaust would be used as kind of umbrella, and these would be maybe implied or just not mentioned at all. Partially true. You can see here that final solution and Nuremberg trials were the most related ones, and Nuremberg trials arguably isn't. I mean, the Nuremberg trials de-emphasize the Holocaust in many ways, but the final solution was mentioned in only 5 of 51 lands. Racial purity mentioned in only 1, Nuremberg 8. The role of bystanders was mentioned in only 2, and anti-Semitism, which is very important to the Holocaust narrative, was mentioned in only 4. So non-Jewish Holocaust victims as well, of course, so looking at Sinti, Roma, other groups that were targeted during this time. They appear in only 5 of the 51 lands, so certainly you can kind of see among these, and of course, this could easily be in the white category. I just sectioned it off. Certainly Holocaust, usually in state standards is mentioned, study the Holocaust, and then no specific details about the Holocaust are mentioned. So conceivably, somebody who has themselves received perhaps a weaker level of Holocaust education or genocide education could become a teacher and then not know as much about the Holocaust him or himself, and then teach exactly the narrative that they were instructed earlier. And then we can kind of see this perpetuate just because it's not mandated that they teach more. Obviously not a statement that they don't teach more, but just they aren't required to teach more. Here we have this kind of pushing forward again. No standards describe the Holocaust as unique. I decided to discuss this because this is a common, I guess there's a dichotomy in the scholarly community about viewing the Holocaust as a unique experience or as not. So I wanted to see if this was mentioned as well. This issue is not addressed in standards. Human rights. Human rights also is mentioned in only 22 of 51 lands. So only 22 of them actually require that human rights be covered. In these 3 subjects, of course, at the secondary level. Now, it could be covered elsewhere, but certainly not in these. The CPPG is mentioned in only 1. And non-Holocaust genocides and atrocities, and of course, this is a massive collection of atrocities. And very few of them are mentioned. The Armenian genocide is number 1 on the list. Well, I guess, I'm sorry. The Rwandan genocide is number 1 on the list quantitatively, but only 16 of 51 require that students learn about the Rwandan genocide. Following that is the Armenian genocide at 14, and then you can kind of see it through the list. I mean, you see the Sudanese one, which is more recent, and a great deal of other ones are listed only once. While it's, as Andrew kind of alluded to, somewhat controversial to talk about Spanish involvement in Latin America, only one does mention what happened to the Aztec peoples, and I do believe that this actually just mentioned it as a mass atrocity using this word instead of actually using the word genocide, which is also interesting as well. Yeah, and an interesting tidbit is, of course, the Armenian genocide. It's controversial to call it a genocide for many people. So this was really interesting. So it's mandated in 14 states. One of the states that mandates its education is Texas. Texas is one of, I believe, 6 or so, maybe not quite 6, it floats around 6 or so states that doesn't officially recognize the Armenian genocide as genocide. So Texas is really unique. So Texas requires that they learn about the Armenian atrocity, not using the word genocide, but it requires that every single student who goes through Texas education learns about it, but Texas refuses to call it genocide, whereas a large number of other states will call it genocide, but as you can see, most of them don't require that students learn it, which is just really interesting treatment of the Armenian case. So here's exactly what we went through again. This is just in a chart. I'm sorry it's so small. It's just, you can only fit so much on a slide. But so here, again, Holocaust is mentioned 38 times. And then here we go, going through specific terms. Once again, every time there is genocide education, there is Holocaust education. One thing that really should be noted, though, is it's mentioned 38 times, but this is, of course, qualitative research, so the quality of how it's mentioned is extremely important. In 6 of those 38 states, Holocaust is mentioned, but it's mentioned as an example. So, and the wording of it makes it so teaching it's optional, where they say, teach students about genocide. An example would be the Holocaust. Like, well, I mean, you can teach about genocide, conceptually genocide, what genocide is, features, common overarching features of genocide, and conceivably you can actually ignore the Holocaust. And conceivably, of course, you can ignore other cases of genocides as well. So that happens in 6. So I'm actually really hesitant to list as 38 states mandating it, more like 38 asterisk, states mandated. Here's sort of a graphical representation. You can see 13 states that do not have any mandates. Intriguingly, Maryland is a state that doesn't have any mandates, but Maryland does have a Holocaust Education Commission, which is sponsored by the state, and that commission itself pushes for Holocaust education in the state of Maryland. So even though it's not mandated at the state level where it's in the state standard, Maryland does feature Holocaust education, just not through this avenue to acquire Holocaust education. Here are the other ones. It's really interesting seeing the Mississippi River and then everything west of the Mississippi. That was interesting, and that was explored later with the quantitative bit. So as I said, seeing this presence and absence of genocide education made me wonder, well, why? Because obviously, you can see cluster, you can see this, and I observed that with a couple exceptions like Vermont and Maryland, a lot of these actually tend to vote Republican. So I was really interested in seeing if there was a political, sort of this maybe political relationship between presence and absence of it. So I decided I'll explore this a bit quantitatively as well, although just honestly fairly superficial quantitative exploration. So moving on to this, what I did is I did t-tests where I weighed the presence and absence of genocide education. So you saw all of those red states. All of those red states had absence, and all of the cool colored states had presence, just fitting it into these 2 bimodal categories. And then I also did ANOVA tests where I did the 4 statuses, which was presence in just English language arts, presence in just history, presence in both ELA and history, and complete absence of genocide education at this level. So for that I did ANOVA. So I did two types of quantitative tests, and I weighed these different statuses that I figured out through the qualitative bit against 9 potential factors that I thought would be intriguing: party affiliation, as noted earlier, the rank of these states in the education system, like if Maine is number 1 and if South Carolina is number 47, those are pretty close to being correct. For these, where I say demographic, this is the percentage of persons living in that state who are members of these groups. And then I also looked at high school graduates and the number of college graduates and population density, which is a recommendation from Dr. Olmsteiner, and I decided to look at this as well. So here looking at this again, party affiliation actually failed to support the presence and absence of genocide education, and it failed to support these different statuses, which I thought was, I found that actually pretty surprising. Education rank also failed to support, so neither of these seem to have an apparent relationship with if genocide education is present or absent. If a state has a larger percentage of Jewish persons living in that state, it's plausible that there is something there. Obviously further research would be needed to explore if there is a relationship, but this is just opening the door for further relationship. It seems as if it's possible that a larger Jewish presence may be related to the presence of genocide education. I do know that the first push for genocide education was with a Jewish community in New Jersey in the 1980s to really kind of push for this, and it was really kind of East Coast bound, and it was pushed by this group, also the Irish group for the Irish potato famine. That was there was an additional push for mass atrocities. The white demographic failed to support, and of course they used white demographic to also measure just minority demographic. In the foreign-born demographic, persons born outside of the United States but living in the States, it's possible that there's a relationship. Obviously, not drawing conclusions with any of this, just exploring for possible further research. Moving forward, the number of persons in poverty also fails to support it. High school graduates, which I view to be, I view high school graduation rates to be somewhat indicative of the success of a state's education system. This seems to be possible for the presence and absence of genocide education. However, moving up from secondary education to post-secondary education, it seems as if BA and BS may not, BA and BS degrees may not support it. Same thing with population density. So kind of taking all of this holistically, like what all of this means or could mean is among all of the potential factors, these are the two I found to be most important. State political leanings and education ranking seem to have no relationship with the presence and absence of genocide education. And again, the percentage of Jewish persons and foreign-born persons seem to maybe, they had statistical significance, which means that there may be something to be explored further. And again, with the education. So now what all of this suggests, looking at the qualitative portion, which was honestly the largest portion of this work, the bulk of it was the qualitative bit, and looking at the quantitative bit, it's clear that there is great range within genocide education. Looking at these three subjects, which are these subjects most likely to feature genocide education, and looking at the secondary level. Now the secondary level was chosen because there's a lot of discussion of elementary school kids are too young to learn about the Holocaust. Maybe middle school kids are also too young. Also, some would contend that high school kids, most of whom are minors, are also too young to learn about a lot of the specifics that happened. So I decided to look at secondary education. Another thing that's intriguing is lands clearly may choose to not mandate genocide education. Clearly, this is a feature of federalism in the United States, it seems, and clearly states seemingly west of the Mississippi River will choose, or may choose, not to mandate genocide education, and of course Holocaust and other specific genocides as well. And this obviously then means that the level of detail is not standardized at the state level. It is left to a smaller scale, to local levels and to individual levels, where you as a member of a school board can be involved in this, or you perhaps as an individual teacher have a degree of subjectivity regarding some of these because of the generic usage of genocide education, if there is genocide education existing at the state level at all. And of course, the final results of the quantitative bit as well, relating to demographics in a state. So I found this all to be intriguing. Certainly the presence and absence of genocide education, and then where it happens to be met, also the specific wordings. I'd be happy to field any questions involving this right now. So Professor Combs, I think, yes.
I'm just curious, so there's no absence in Texas, like you mentioned, so they teach
right.
it, but they just don't use the word genocide, they use atrocity.
Right, yeah,
so
yeah.
What is the distinction between the two for those certain states and their education system to differentiate between a genocide and atrocity? Why do they not use the term genocide, since most know
right.
that's a genocide?
Yeah, so the Armenian genocide is a really special case in international relations where the Republic of Turkey is an extremely important NATO ally, and the Republic of Turkey, the Armenian genocide took place in the Ottoman Empire. The Republic of Turkey is the successor state of the Ottoman Empire, and many of the officials in the Republic of Turkey refuse to acknowledge this part of their past, which happened during World War I. So while there has been a lot of push in the United States and in other countries to maybe kind of recognize this genocide that's now 100 years old as genocide, there's a lot of pushback from Turkey where they actually, they disallow U.S. troops from being in air bases in Turkey, from using air bases. They prevent the flow of supplies to U.S. troops in Iraq and in other parts of the Middle East. The Republic of Turkey borders Iraq, it borders Syria, and has a small border with Iran, and it's across the Black Sea from the Crimean Peninsula. So the Republic of Turkey geostrategically remains important. So that's why it hasn't been recognized at the largest national level. And then individual states have chosen to do it. I don't know specifically why Texas has chosen not to do it, but I do know that, I will guess that it's probably related to that relationship, if there's even a push for it to be recognized at all. Honestly, a lot of people tend to view it as something that happened 100 years ago and lower on the priority list of things that need to be done when it comes to policy making and making other decisions for the state. If that answers your question, yeah. More questions? Yes, Professor.
I mean, just to sort of follow up on that, I think you were getting at this, but that obviously that term genocide is a politically loaded term and comes with all kinds of foreign policy and military resources along with it, and that I think that cuts both ways as well. I don't know if your research found, for example, the ways in which different groups try to leverage the use of the word genocide to like specific causes that really don't have much to do with the Shoah or the 1930s, 40s Holocaust.
Yeah, right. It was. I did a lot of preliminary reading about this before deciding exactly what I wanted to do, and I do know that in the 1980s, genocide education became a lot more important for people, and specifically that Irish group that I mentioned, they were Bostonian Irishmen, and they were interested in pushing for as much recognition of the Irish potato famine and British policy regarding the Irish potato famine as much as possible, and I did readings of like quotes from individuals, and only one time did the word genocide pop up, but the word it was describing how the United Kingdom had done this policy had facilitated the Irish potato famine to an extent that was the author wrote that was ethnically based on this Irish versus Great Britain, the island Great Britain, split between them. So it was based on that. So he was using this as a way of describing genocide, which of course genocide, one of the qualifiers is it being ethnically motivated. Also he described the Catholic Protestant split between the two islands, furthering this as justification for using the word genocide. Now, genocide in state legislation hasn't popped up with specific relevance to the Irish potato famine or to any British policy regarding it. So it seems as if on the and that includes New Jersey, New Jersey and Massachusetts, where a lot of this was taking place. So it seems as if for the state level, that pushing for that specific wording with regard to this specific treatment of Irish persons was well, it failed to be implemented into the state level, but certainly I believe, because genocide is an extremely loaded word, as you described, I think that it was effective in garnering attention for that, and in Massachusetts, the Irish potato famine, it is required that students learn about in world history. So, Professor Lucius.
And I don't know if you, I know that one of the variables you looked at was presence of foreign-born population in a state. Did you, by any chance, look more closely, especially kind of to see if there was a relationship between explicit mention of other genocides and presence of, of people from that region? Like, for example, high, proportion of, refugees or immigrants from former Yugoslavia, right. Recognition of that in former Yugoslavia, and the same for the other. I think the Armenian one would be complicated again, precisely because of the sort of not that the perpetrators of genocide from in other instances aren't don't want theirs to be referred to as genocide, perpetrators of genocide, but there isn't quite the same strong lobby as there is in the Turkish case. But did you have a chance to break down the foreign-born part?
Right. That's a really good idea. Diaspora communities was the reason why I chose to add foreign-born persons to the list. I did not explore specifically any relationship like that. I think that's a really wonderful idea for follow-up study. I mean, the quantitative bit that I did was surface level quantitative analysis, and it was quite honestly more of an addendum to the fact that I filtered out 13 states and then these other states and then 2 and whatever the other numbers were. I think that's a really wonderful idea for a follow-up study. I didn't do it, but it's definitely something that should be explored. Yes, Dr. Tobe.
Yeah, so next year on your Fulbright, you're going to be studying genocide education in Luxembourg. So
Yes.
What did you learn from this that you might be applying there that maybe you didn't know before? And in what way might this sort of help to inform what you're doing?
Right, yeah, so that's, I'm going to slide back here really quick. I'll get too far. United States. So in Luxembourg, just to briefly describe my research proposal, Luxembourg is a really small country. It's the size of Allen County plus Adams County plus 1 square mile. So it's conceivable. The square mile matters. So it's really conceivable in the 9 months of the Fulbright stay to visit all corners of this state, which is really nice and something that obviously I can't do in the United States. So Luxembourg's broken up into five education regions: north, south, east, west, and central, and its degree of federalism is certainly different than what exists in the United States. But something that isn't different is the fact that these regions do have a level of autonomy when it comes to their education. So I can certainly map out something like this where I can figure out what is mandated specifically in these 5 different regions and how this may be different by having interviews. Another thing I wasn't able to do here, I didn't seek IRB approval for any of this research. I didn't pursue interviews for this, but with that, I'll be able to draw a similar map, a little bit smaller, a similar map to something like this, and I can, through those interviews and through looking at specifically the standards for every single school in Luxembourg, not just every single state, but all 52 public schools. I can look at the specific differences among those, and I can tease out on a much greater level than I was able to do for this. I can tease out what matters, and what's really interesting about Luxembourg is it's a post-Holocaust state that a lot of people don't view as a post-Holocaust state. It had a small Jewish demographic in it, which is probably why it's been ignored. But it was one of only 2 states declared Judenrein or Judenfrei, cleansed or / free of Jews. So it's and it was annexed into the Third Reich. So its history with the Holocaust is definitely something that shouldn't be ignored. It's something that should be considered as well. So with that, my final stage is I'm actually planning on filling this out with more detail and then doing, to the degree appropriate, a comparative analysis between what was discovered in Luxembourg, a state with a specific Holocaust, post-genocide history, and the United States, which obviously isn't a post-Holocaust state, debatably post-genocide state, as mentioned, but certainly not post-Holocaust state. So this honestly really complements, like I said earlier, Honors H399. It's really helped. That's how I did this, and I think it was instrumental in getting that award. Okay, lots of hands now. Miriam.
Okay, now that the good questions have been taken. So I'm not familiar with what the curriculum of English language arts is because I'm not from here. But I was interested in knowing if you kind of were able to tease out what types of things about the genocide were mentioned in English language arts versus history classes, and if there's a relationship between that and the states that choose to teach it in both of those fields of study or classes.
Right. The main distinction with approach to GE between history, both U.S. and world history, and ELA is certainly the approach. ELA oftentimes would feature the Holocaust in books like The Diary of Anne Frank or Night, among a few other works. Those were the two books most often mentioned, and many of the 38 asterisk states, many of those 6 received that asterisk because they would mention that Night is a good book for students to read, but they wouldn't actually specifically require that they do read Night. And obviously, if the students don't read Night, then the students, or don't read a book similar to Night thematically, then those students aren't receiving genocide education in their English language arts class. It's more of a checkbox. Yes, I would like to opt into genocide education for this class. So far as teasing out a relationship between ELA only and others, ELA only was featured in Connecticut exclusively. So because it was in just one state, I didn't want to do an analysis as I did with the other states. I mean, some of these already have a small number. Now, this of course isn't a sample; it's a whole population of every single state. But just because Connecticut was a sole state with that status, it's something I chose not to look into more deeply. I mean, that would be more of a case study of Connecticut than a study like this. So, Dr. Wall.
Just a quick question. I just wondered on the political affiliation issue. I mean,
Yes.
it is so a state can vote in national elections Democratic, the governor can be Republican. I mean, I don't know. That seems like a complicated one. I mean, wasn't that one of your things?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yes.
So I just didn't know how you determined the state's political status.
Right. So in order to determine like if a state tends to go one way or another, I used Gallup data because Gallup seemed to be a really credible source for voting behavior and elections and all of this. So I used them, and I deferred to their. I looked for their most recent publication on this, and most of this work was done in 2016. So I pulled their 2000. It was late 2016. So I pulled their most recent data, which was from earlier in the year, and so that was about 2015. Obviously, political, politics is dynamic, so it's difficult working with data that's 2 years old, or at least it's limited. But something that I did notice about Gallup, even though I chose to still go with it, is Gallup considered Louisiana to be a neutral state, whereas when I think of Louisiana, I tend to think that Louisiana votes more Republican than others. So I actually thought that Gallup's perception of these states tended to throw more into the neutral category than anything else. And I do believe that if, now I didn't look at Pew or another one. I chose to use Gallup, but I wouldn't be surprised if another research institution would have a state like Louisiana, maybe leans Republican, as opposed to some of these states which you would consider strongly Republican, like South Carolina. So definitely, I think that if another basis was used for the partisanship of these states, different results could probably. I wouldn't be surprised if different results would be yielded. I had Andrew in the back for a while.
This was a little bit more complicated, a little more in-depth to the Holocaust itself. As you know, there's two parts of the Holocaust. There's the Western Industrial Front, where it was more industrialized killings, and then there's the Eastern Front. So even within that, how much of what they teach with Holocaust studies is based on how they view World War II, how that played out? If a state views the U.S. had a bigger hand than the Soviet Union, they teach more about the killings on the Western Front, versus if they view it more as, the Soviet Union took the brunt and really helped win the war. They view it more as, they teach the Western and Eastern, fronts of the killing or involved in the Holocaust.
Right. So with, I noticed that with every single, the state that had probably the most text, not necessarily the most requirements, but the most text regarding this, I believe was California, just based on not actually measuring it, but just having to read all of these. California is pretty big. And even California was extremely superficial with everything that I talked about. California, now separating it from World War II a little bit and looking specifically at the Holocaust, California regarding the Holocaust didn't mention differences between the Holocaust as conducted by complicit people and bystanders in Vichy France versus how it was conducted in Poland, where a large number of the killing centers were featured. It didn't separate this geographically. It didn't separate it conceptually. It also didn't separate it chronologically, where towards the end, and which is of course why I looked at the final solution, wherever it is, because the Holocaust took place over several years, and it changed. It became much more dramatic towards the end as other things were failing. None of this was changed, and certainly no differences were made between Eastern and Western theaters of the Holocaust, if I may use that word. One thing that I wanted to look at regarding this was Soviet liberation of camps and United States liberation of camps. Oftentimes you'll see in movies, you'll see U.S. soldiers liberating camps, which had actually been liberated by Soviet forces. In popular culture, you'll see this. Zero states mentioned Soviet liberation or any liberation at all of camps. Zero states also mentioned U.S. liberation. That topic specifically was I don't know if ignored or overlooked is appropriate. It's probably case by case, but it was not featured in the standards. Probably one more questions. Is that, I can't see you because of the light. Dr. Schuster, sorry.
Hey, great presentation, Cody. I mean, this is an issue that I've been dealing with since I've been teaching for 25 years. I've taught history in public schools in Southern California. I've taught history in Istanbul, Turkey, and it's to the point where it all comes down to the devil's in the details, as other people have pointed out, how the term genocide means different things to different people. So for you, I'm curious, with this, how do you define genocide, just in one sentence? And then I got a quick follow-up question.
Right. I would defer to the United Nations Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, which lists. It's not a particularly long convention, but it does list a definition that's used, and it talks about the destruction in whole or in part of groups based on various criteria, including ethnic groups and religious groups, and it talks of, and intent is also important regarding genocide, which is one thing that makes it difficult to apply the label. For better or worse, proving intent is very difficult when we're talking about something like a national policy, proving, this was conducted not to secure a wartime border or whatever the justification may be leveled, but this was conducted to eliminate a group of people for the fact that they exist as that group of people. So this is the UNCPPG is the definition that's often deferred to, and it's the one that I lean on too.
Okay, now, if any nation, whether it be Turkey or United States, for instance, you haven't really specifically mentioned American Indians, which is,
right,
arguably a genocide as well.
Yeah.
For any nation to accept genocide, which Germany has graciously done, but they're the exception, it sounds like that would require the nation to kind of swallow its pride.
Yeah.
In a way that, with American exceptionalism, I don't think we would be able to ever do as a nation. It's like expecting a child to accept early on that their parent is an alcoholic or something. It needs to happen with its own time. So in that sense, my overall question to you is, to what extent do you think the word genocide has a future in education? And to what extent do you think it's going to be phased out in favor of less prickly terms?
Right. Certainly, I think that with application to events regarding indigenous persons of the United States, if the CPPG is the one that we operate under, it doesn't apply retroactively. So this was, the word genocide was coined in the late stages of the Holocaust, and it was popularized as a word following the Holocaust, and that's how we got this. Turkey, to go back to Turkey, Turkey's counter-argument often to the application of the word genocide to describe the Armenian case is that you were retroactively applying a word. Genocide didn't exist when the Armenian incident happened. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think that regarding the future of genocide, the word genocide, in its application in education, unless there's a fundamental change in perception regarding regarding like a retroactive application of this word genocide. It seems unlikely that it will be applied to anything predating the Holocaust. But what is interesting is Darfur, which is the most recent, I believe it's the most recent one. Yeah, the Sudanese one. It's the most recent one that's on the list of ones that had taken place. 10 do have it, and obviously these 10 before Darfur took place, they had mandates regarding genocide education. So it was updated with the time that's happening. Now, of course, the United States recognizes the Darfuri genocide as a genocide, so it's much more likely to be implemented. But that does look like movement in adding more genocides to be studied as genocides unfold. It seems as if they may be applied, although 10 out of 51, they may be applied in state standards as well. So it seems to be, at least they're changing.
Or post-World War II seems important for the application of the term.
Yes, yeah, positive.
Interesting.
Dr. Rolston,
I have two questions. I don't know if you've looked at it, but have you noticed the push for genocide education or Holocaust education correlated with the push for rights education in general? In other words, whether it's civil rights education, things like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It was sort of this historical movement was beyond the scope of my analysis, but I do know that it was largely started in the 1980s, and one of the scholars that I read about hypothesized that this movement was started in part because of a sort of a U.S. cultural interest in the Holocaust following the mini-series The Holocaust, and there's more interest just from the people in this. And of course, this taking place in the 1980s makes it somewhat removed from civil rights movement, and this was the late 1980s, so somewhat removed from the kind of the peak of the women's rights movement in the late 1970s as well. What would be really interesting is because these state standards are archived. I mean, you can look at the state standards in the 1960s. What would be really interesting is to see when specifically in these 51 areas they were inserted. Yeah, certainly the bulk of them, like 1989 to 1995, the bulk of them existed, and other states, of course, have been a little bit later, and that's regarding just the Holocaust. It's not regarding other genocides as well. That would be a really interesting search, though, but it does seem to be, at least regarding the Holocaust specifically, not human rights or other issues. It seems to be that scholar believed that it was related to this cultural interest in the Holocaust.
I just have a second kind of comment question. You were talking about Texas,
yeah.
And if you will, as Professor Carr talked about, the politics of genocide, etc.
Yeah.
Kind of thinking about the fact that certainly there's argument and push not to add other genocides, if you will, because the Holocaust, the specialness of the Holocaust, that you in a sense dilute the history of the Holocaust by adding to it genocides. I'm not sure that's, in your study, etc., but it's something that I thought was worth kind of mentioning and kind of thinking.
Right, yeah. Lately I did consider it in once I go to it. There we go. In the uniqueness of the Holocaust, one discussion is the Holocaust. Now there are kind of two discussions of the Holocaust as unique. As the Holocaust is a uniquely Jewish experience, is one way of viewing uniqueness of the Holocaust, and others, such as a couple state officials from Israel I've seen make this statement, where the Holocaust is the only genocide, and other things are tragedies and stuff, and they're not denying the multiple hundreds of thousands killed in Rwanda, but they are saying that the Holocaust exclusively is the sole genocide that has existed in human history. I only explored it regarding key concept number 9. I didn't look into it any further, because I was just reading the state standards and not necessarily the debates regarding who made the state standards in these 3 subjects in the 51 lands. I mean, maybe next year, but not quite now. But the uniqueness of the Holocaust was never mentioned, even indirectly, in ways that some of these were mentioned indirectly, and I had to make a decision if it would be counted or not, which is a difficult decision for research like this. But it always took a wide path away from any notions of the Holocaust as unique in any of these 2 different ways of viewing it. Dr. Virtue.
One of the many things I'm interested in your presentation has to do with the relationship between sort of, you know, state top-down standards versus like individual decisions on the part of individual teachers, right? And what they're going to choose to emphasize in the classroom. And I was wondering if you've looked, if you haven't done this, if it might be interesting to you before you go to Luxembourg to maybe talk to teachers in Fort Wayne, because I know I have good friends that are Burmese, and I don't know this. I'm going to ask them now. I'm curious. But my impression from talking to the kid, there's 10 kids in the family, and we talk a lot about their education. My impression is that they're getting a lot of Holocaust education. It might just be that they're particularly fascinated by it. They're, as Burmese refugees or just in general, right? But I wonder, that might be kind of interesting. Have you thought about maybe talking to some teachers locally as a way of sort of fine-tuning questions you might ask in Luxembourg?
Yeah, my original proposal for this actually involved discussions with teachers, and I planned on doing kind of the Luxembourg proposal in Allen County, just kind of smaller. But because of the feasibility of balancing that project with the rest of my semester, and having to seek approval, it just seemed, so far as my research purposes went, logistically difficult. Although I think it's incredibly important that the individual teachers are considered in something like this, because this is purely just reading words that exist on a PDF online. I mean, it's not actually, this is not necessarily application. You can choose to teach things that aren't mandated, and conceivably you can ignore things that are mandated, and the follow-through with that is difficult to police how this is orchestrated. I think that's extremely invaluable to figure out how it actually exists, not just in theory, but in application, which is definitely more important, how the students actually learn about this versus how they're supposed to learn about it.
Slightly different questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Professor.
I think Professor Olmsteiner makes a really good point in terms of just because you have Holocaust requirements across states doesn't necessarily protect or sort of stave off the trivialization of the Holocaust. And I know, for example, that the standards in New Jersey have been quite controversial because they're doing bullying. They're doing education on bullying in K through 6th grades and calling that Holocaust education. And I think it's just
right.
It's that it's like, how far can you kind of push the concept of Holocaust education before it becomes watered down or trivialized.
Yeah.
Kind of a related question, and I don't want to be too marginal to what you're studying, but as a communication student, you mentioned a little bit of the role of some of the pop culture in the US in influencing how Holocaust is treated in the classrooms, and you also mentioned how Holocaust might be a little bit of a sensitive subject when teaching minors about mass atrocities. I was wondering, I know you didn't code for that, but if in the standards you came across about any types of guidelines regarding how the use of other types of media could and should maybe be used in the classroom.
Right. The main medium featured was definitely again in the English language arts one, and it was books. There was not recommendations for like a specific video of something that was produced by an institute, or perhaps a specific video that was featured in the Nuremberg trials, or anything like this, maybe a primary or secondary source through through that. The main thing, because a lot of standards are quite old now, and they actually predate modern media. They're just kind of updated, maybe for Darfur or something like that, but they're not like fundamentally changed as new things pop up. Books, aside from the teacher being a medium, books were the only medium through which this was pushed, and that was across the board. I wouldn't be surprised, because there's a lot of talk of moving education forward regarding tablets and stuff like this, like providing tablets for students and all of this. Now it hasn't touched standards, which I assume are probably very difficult to change, and I assume are probably really big headaches to change. And if you say students must learn on a tablet, and then 10 years later tablets are obsolete, they would have to change it again. I do know that, well, anyway, books are the ones predominantly featured, exclusively featured, actually.